Welcome to This Explainer. Today we're unpacking a massive 10,000-year history that's probably sitting right inside your pantry right now. We are looking at the dawn of harvest and the history of ancient grains. Honestly, these aren't just some modern health fad. They are quite literally the biological foundations of human civilization. So let's trace these incredibly resilient seeds all the way from the wild fields of the distant past right up to our modern dinner tables.
Okay, let's dive into this. What do your trendy modern groceries have in common with ancient Roman legions? I know, it sounds like the setup to a really strange historical joke, but the answer is actually the fuel that kept them running. The very same grains packaged in those sleek little bags at your local store today, well, they sustained the expanding empires of the ancient world. They fueled the soldiers, fed the citizens, and allowed early societies to just absolutely thrive. But to really understand how all of that connects to us today, we need to first define what we're actually talking about.
Right off the bat, I want to clarify something pretty important. Ancient grains is actually a marketing-driven term. There's no strict scientific definition for it. However, organizations like the Whole Grains Council use this exact categorization to describe grains and pseudo-cereals that have remained largely unchanged by modern selective breeding over the last several hundred years. So unlike modern white rice or sweet corn, which have been heavily hybridized for, massive industrial yield, ancient grains are the biological stalwarts. They're the ultimate survivors that have stayed true to their original genetic blueprints since the very dawn of agriculture.
And to really appreciate that survival, you have to consider this timeline. Stretching back to about 75,000 years ago, humans were just harvesting wild grains. We were hunter-gatherers. But the true shift happened roughly 10,000 years ago during the Neolithic Revolution in the Fertile Crescent. At these early archaeological sites in places like modern-day Iraq, Syria, and Turkey, humans actually began domesticating the wild ancestors of wheat and barley. It's like a giant puzzle coming together, because this exact shift triggered the food surpluses that enabled massive population growth. It was the spark for the rise of human civilization as we know it.
Now here is a really interesting info clip for you. Consider humanity's oldest domesticated wheat, Einkorn. It was domesticated over 9,000 years ago in southeastern Turkey, and it possesses exactly 14 chromosomes. Just 14. Because its ancient diploid genetics, meaning it only has 2 sets of chromosomes, haven't been heavily manipulated or engineered over millennia, that number 14 remains a pure genetic fingerprint of antiquity. It is incredibly nutrient-dense, and it has stayed completely untouched by modern agricultural tinkering.
So the crucial point is how this ancient wheat family directly contrasts with what most of us eat today. Ancient wheats, your Einkorn, Emmer, spelt, they've stubbornly held on to their complex, unhybridized heritage. Now, contrast that with modern bread wheat. Scientifically, that's known as Triticum aestivum. This is a much later, highly bred hybrid descendant that's been specifically manipulated over time to maximize crop yields and, create that fluffy white bread we see lining the supermarket aisles. That intense hybridization totally excludes it from the ancient category.
Let's look a bit closer at one of those ancient family members, Emmer. You actually might know it as farro. Domesticated around 8,500 BCE, this tetraploid wheat, meaning it carries 4 sets of chromosomes, is just an absolute powerhouse of history. This was the key crop that fueled ancient Egypt. And hey, remember our question earlier about the Roman legions? Emmer was literally the biological fuel for Rome's military conquests. It was the primary daily sustenance that fed those soldiers as they marched across the known world.
Rounding out the ancient wheat family, we've got spelt and Khorasan. Spelt is a more complex hexaploid wheat, containing 6 sets of chromosomes, and it's been cultivated since around 5000 BCE. It is probably most famous for its incredible historical run as a daily dietary staple all throughout medieval Europe. Then there's Khorasan, which you'll often see recognized today by its trademarked name, kamut. Originating from Mesopotamia, it is really distinct. It has these much larger kernels and a wonderfully rich, nutty flavor. Together, these grains really paint a complete portrait of the ancient wheat family that fed the entire Old World.
And this brilliantly illustrates that the Old World relied on far more than just wheat. Take barley, for example. It was essential across ancient Egypt and Europe for food, for animal feed, and yes, crucially, for beer. Moving east, millet brought its incredibly drought-resistant small seeds across Asia and Africa. Sorghum, well, that survived arid African conditions for over 8 millennia. And teff, which is this tiny, wildly climate-resilient staple from Ethiopia and Eritrea, has been used to make injera flatbread for centuries. These plants, they didn't just feed people, they sustained human life in some incredibly harsh and diverse environments.
But the story of ancient grains is definitely not confined to the Old World. Let's travel across the globe for a second, right to the Andes Mountains in South America. Here, between 5,000 and 7,000 years ago, quinoa was domesticated. And the Inca revered this crop so deeply that they gave it a sacred name. They called it the mother of all grains. Now, quinoa is actually a pseudo-cereal. That basically means it's not a true grass like wheat is, but it is a nutritional marvel. It's a complete protein, and it was considered so vital to their empire that the Inca emperors would actually ceremonially plant the first seeds of the season themselves.
Heading a bit further north, the Aztecs had their own highly revered crop, amaranth. They went ahead and called it the grain of the gods. Amaranth is another high-lysine, gluten-free pseudo-cereal, and it's been cultivated for over 8,000 years. And here's some really incredible trivia for you. Amaranth wasn't just eaten. It was so deeply woven into the social and religious structures of the Aztec Empire that it literally served as a tribute currency for payments and rituals. No way, right? Oh, and we also definitely have to give a quick nod to buckwheat here, which is another ancient pseudo-cereal originating in Asia and used for thousands of years in China. These crops were the true lifeblood of ancient empires.
Let's move to and see how this builds into the agricultural reality we live in today. The historical arc of these crops basically happens in three major steps. First, as we've just seen, they were the imperial staples, fueling humanity, tied to sacred rituals, and driving massive societal growth. Second came the decline. During the mid-20th century's Green Revolution, these ancient grains nearly vanished completely from the global diet as modern, higher-yielding hybrid varieties of wheat, corn, and rice kind of just took over to feed a rapidly growing global population. But now we've entered step 3, an unprecedented 21st century revival.
So why exactly is this modern revival happening right now? Well, health-conscious consumers are actively driving this shift. People are seeking out minimally processed alternatives that are higher in fiber, essential minerals, and antioxidants. Culturally, they just offer amazing, varied flavors with these nutty, chewy textures that you absolutely can't get from standard white flour. But hey, it's important to keep in mind that while they offer incredible nutritional diversity, most ancient wheats like spelt, kamut, and farro, they do still contain gluten, so they aren't for everyone. But beyond just human health, these crops are highly prized for their environmental resilience, making them absolutely excellent candidates for sustainable farming in a rapidly changing climate.
Which brings us to a final provocative thought. Ancient grains represent humanity's earliest agricultural successes. They are the tough, resilient survivors that fueled civilizations long before industrial breeding ever even existed. Now, they aren't necessarily magically superior to every single modern crop, but their historical endurance is just undeniable. So, as we look for more resilient, sustainable crops to feed our future world in the face of mounting environmental challenges, is the answer actually hiding right there in our distant past? I'll leave you to ponder that the next time you enjoy a bowl of quinoa or a slice of spelt bread. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep exploring the incredible history hiding in your everyday life.